and their conservation. And so one of the things we've been doing is working with many different elephant experts, many different elephant conservation projects around the world. And we try to share some of those wonderful people with our community so you can learn more about some of the work that's going on. Tonight we're lucky to have Dr. Christopher Stremme here with us this evening to talk with us. And our focus tonight is really to look at the plight of Asian elephants. We believe there's somewhere between 30 and 50,000 Asian elephants still in the range of countries in Asia where they're from. We think about 15,000 of those animals are actually actively in captive management. And so there's a much smaller number than you might have guessed from that first number that are persisting in the wild. And the zoo community, in partnership with other conservation organizations, are actively working on issues of animal welfare, whether they're in the zoo community. We have about 300 elephants in the North American zoos, approximately half Asian, half African, although a few more in the African. Or if it's about animal medicine and looking at the veterinary medicine issues both in captive animals and in wild animals, or there are various conservation challenges that we face. As for many of the large animals on the earth, one of the largest threats to elephants in the wild is loss of habitat and the increasing conflict between human populations and elephant populations as we all try to use the same pieces of land. And so part of the challenge we all face is how do we create sustainable futures for our different wildlife communities and different human communities. But tonight we're lucky to have a special guest here. I think those of you who've known us for a while know the zoo community works together in many different ways. We work together to take care of the animals in our collections because no one institution is large enough to have a whole population that's genetically viable of any species, so we work together for the care and breeding of our elephants. We also work together on research about animal welfare and animal medicine. We also work together to help support animal conservation in the wild, and so as Bruce Bonke, our deputy director, would say, it takes a village to save an elephant. Tonight we're here because Dr. Stremme is with us, and he studied veterinary medicine in Germany. After that, he started apparently traveling around the world, although this year he's just traveling around the United States, I think. He's traveling to many different institutions in the U.S. to share his work with us. He spent more than 15 years working with elephants in several zoos in Germany, and he has a special interest in Asian elephants and special techniques of treatment and their care. And since 2006, he's worked as the project manager for, now there will be a quiz on this name later, the Elephant Healthcare Program of the Veterinary Society for the Sumatran Wildlife Conservation. And he's really interested in helping improve the quality of care of elephants in captive facilities in the elephant training centers of Sumatra. So Dr. Stremme will speak with us for a while, and then Bruce Bonke, our deputy director, will run a question and answer session for a while, and then we'll have more hors d'oeuvres and discussion. And unless Christopher objects, if you decide you need to refresh your beverage, just sneak up quietly, go to the back, and come back to your seat, and I don't think you'll think it was anything he said.
I will do so as well.
Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Stremme.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to have the chance to be here today to talk to you all and give you a little bit an insight about the situation of elephants in Sumatra. The Asian elephants are currently, the Asian elephant is one species divided currently in 4 subspecies. One of the subspecies is the Sumatran elephant, which is endemic to the Sumatran island. The Sumatran elephant slightly differs in shape and in size from the other subspecies. As you can see from these figures, the Sumatran elephant is definitely smaller in average than the mainland species and the Sri Lankan elephant. And on average, we have relatively large ears in the Sumatran elephants. We often find tails that reach to the ground, and we have almost 99% of the males in Sumatra have tusks, and the tusks are very much straight downwards, not that much forward like we often find in the mainland subspecies in Thailand and in India. So this is a few features that are different in the Sumatran elephant compared to the other subspecies. Unfortunately, the habitat of the Sumatran elephant, the tropical rainforest during the past decades, heavily have been devastated through to logging, cultivation, encroachment of habitats, and the habitat that some decades ago looked like this at almost over the country in Sumatra, nowadays to a vast extent looks like this. This is oil palm plantation. This is a big threat to species conservation and habitat conservation for the wildlife in Sumatra. You can see here roughly what a little of forest cover is left in Sumatra, and actually this part and this part is the Loisa National Park, this part is the Kerinci Seblat National Park, which mainly is mountain area where no suitable habitat is available for elephants. So as a result from this habitat loss during the past decades, a lot of human-elephant conflict appeared, elephants losing their habitat, trying to forage from farmland in and around their habitats, causing damage to the farmers, destructing houses, damaging crops, and finally the elephants lose because farmers, as nobody else takes action, the farmers help themselves and just shoot or poison the elephants. This conflict had triggered in 1984 the Indonesian government to take action, in the way which was not very suitable, by just capturing this so-called troublesome conflict elephants, which of course didn't really lead to a solution, because the main problem, habitat destruction, was not sufficiently approached. This program was run for about 15 years formally by the central government. They hired entire teams from Thailand with elephants and mahouts, because in Sumatra at that time there was no tradition left anymore in handling, capturing and taming elephants. So they hired entire mahouts and run this program officially for 15 years. But even after they officially stopped, unofficially in some provinces at least, capture of wild elephant was continued due to a lack of alternative elephant conflict mitigation strategies. So we only since now a year ago have really a complete stop of wild elephant capture. So what did they do with these elephants? There's a significant difference to other Asian countries where elephants were captured in the past decades and centuries because people wanted to have the elephants. People captured elephants because they could utilize the elephants, because the elephants had a value. That was the opposite in Sumatra. In Sumatra the elephants were captured because they want to get rid of the elephants. The elephants were a burden, but by law it was not allowed to shoot the elephants or cull the elephants, because by international and Indonesian law it's protected wildlife. So the government implemented so-called elephant training centers and brought these elephants in the so-called elephant training centers for taming and domestication. But due to the fact that they didn't have really a plan how to utilize these elephants properly, conditions in these government-run camps are rather poor, insufficient nutrition of the elephants, insufficient medical management, very, very poor staff qualification, because mahouts were locally hired, randomly hired, without having any prior training and getting any proper education how to handle and manage elephants. So we have a lot of problems in these camps, and a lot of health problems in these camps. As a response to that, during the past, I would say 6-7 years, this is the current situation in Sumatra. The red spots show the remaining elephant population. So you see that it's a highly fragmented population, and besides about 2,500 wild elephants, we have about 550 captive elephants throughout Indonesia, about 300 of them living in so-called elephant training centers or conservation response units, and 250 living in zoos and safari parks, also on the neighboring island of Java, around here. So you can see from this number already that the captive elephants of the Sumatran subspecies represent quite a significant percentage of the overall population. So to approach this problem with the captive elephants and to develop human-elephant conflict mitigation strategies, several NGOs during the past years luckily have decided to rent or to lend small groups from these government camps to utilize them in small groups and so-called conservation response units, where the elephants are used for forest patrols, like in these pictures, also for human-elephant conflict mitigation, to chase elephants, wild elephants, back into their habitats once they reach the border to the farmland, and also used in some areas for ecotourism in order to support the local communities with some alternative income generating, also used for different kind of education activities in local schools and local communities. So what I am doing, what we are doing, what is our organization doing in this picture? So as I mentioned about the poor veterinary care, our organization with my colleagues and myself, we try to provide veterinary support, veterinary care, implement proper medical management for these elephants in captivity throughout Indonesia. Currently we are active in the here shown areas and camps. There are 2 other provinces, Riau and South Sumatra, where they also have government trainings camps where we are not active currently on a regular basis because we just don't have sufficient budgets yet for that. So what is the main problems that we find? The main medical problems that we face are rather basic. As you can see, parasitism, malnutrition, wounds, wound infection, foot infections, eye infection, stereotype behaviors, unhygienic management, all very basic problems which cause most of the medical problems that we have, most of the cases that we have to treat in these camps. So parasitism, obviously in zoos nowadays, amongst the zoo population of the elephants, to my knowledge, not really is an issue at all because they're properly managed, but in all around in Asia, in the captive population in Asia, parasites are a big issue and cause a lot of problems and a lot of death because it's not properly managed. For us, very important is to find first the different species of parasites that occur in these elephants, because not all the species that we can meet in these elephants can be easily treated with one and the same drug. So we need to know first what is going on, and interesting for us was a paramphistomum infections, which often in the literature is described as a minor problem and not really relevant, but we found in many elephants, or in several elephants, we did postmortems on, and in feces investigations, that is actually a big issue to our elephants, and it took us a while to find a sufficient drug that we can use to treat this problem. While wounds, we have a lot of wound problems in the elephants due to various reasons. Often elephants fight with each other. Sometimes elephants, if they're kept close to wild elephant habitats and during night, wild elephants come out of the forest and start to fight with the captive elephants, and the captive elephants are usually chained. So this is an injury that was caused by a wild elephant to a captive elephant. This is an injury of the footpad of an elephant due to a foreign body in the surrounding. And a big issue is also insufficient use of management tools such as restraint tools, hobbles, anchors, like in this is a big male that was handed over to a Mahu that hadn't enough experience and didn't really feel comfortable himself, and just tried to get around with the elephant by continuously beating up on the forehead, which caused these nasty wounds. So as I mentioned, we only have no captures anymore in Sumatra, wild elephant capture, since the end of the last year. During the years before, we had more or less regular still coming wild captured elephants in the camps for taming and for training. And the traditional restraint methods often cause really bad wounds. This is the traditional hobbles which I use. This is a wooden scaffold which is fixed around the neck right after the elephant gets captured in the forest, and usually in the inside there are fitted nails so that it causes really bad injuries to the elephants in order to reduce the elephant's resistance. So usually if we have wounds, our experience get treated early enough and immediately enough, we don't have a lot of problems with wound healing, but mostly, especially in the beginning when we started to work with the Mahouts, often it was delayed reported and wounds became really bad. Infections, abscesses, measles and tetanus infections were the problems that we had to deal with in order to manage these wounds. Here, just, I mean, that might be a little bit interesting maybe for the veterinarians amongst us. There are a few here, but another thing is this wound treatment, just applying basic things like an injection, especially in wild elephants or newly captured elephants, and elephants that are still under training are not so easy, sometimes a little bit difficult. We don't have a really restrained shoe like nowadays common in modern zoos. So we have to help out each other with captive elephants, with kunki elephants, or with some really little bit adventurous restraint methods. Like in this elephant who had foot problems and needed to approach the feet, but this elephant wasn't trained for any kind of foot care. This is an example again of very poor use restraint device. I mentioned that before. This is this kind of wooden scaffold which is fitted around the neck of the elephant. Here you can see the bent over nails on the inside, and this caused often very, very, very serious wounds, really destructing the whole muscle layers of the neck as deep as several centimeters. And it took us quite a while. In this picture, that has already been replaced by a chain covered with a rubber tube. But in this elephant, there was really, really bad wounds, and finally this elephant died from the infections of this wound. It took us quite a while to work with the mounts to interfere in that, because you have to consider these elephants on these mounts working with their techniques in several years, and they weren't easy. Say, well, you tell me like that, I do it in a different way. You need to gain their trust, and you need to prove it somehow, the things that you suggest really working. So in the beginning, from the beginning on, we tried to suggest improvements, but it took us quite a while until the Mahout were willing to receive the things that we suggested. Here's another elephant where this restraint tool was not used anymore, where from the beginning on, rubber-coated chain was used as a restraint tool around the neck, and still it causes some wounds, but I think you clearly can see the difference, and this animal nowadays is still alive and in reasonable health condition. This animal is dead. Another important change in restraint was the hobbles, which are used for the legs. These are the traditional rattan hobbles, which they use, which is no problem in tame elephants, which are already well trained and well tamed, which are not fighting against this kind of restraint. But wild elephants, which continuously in the beginning try to fight it, it causes really very, very bad wounds to the legs. And again, in here, finally, we succeeded to convince the Mahout to use ropes which are covered with rubber tubes. Well, often as asked, or as said, elephants in the wild, elephant in Asian rain countries, under management, traditional managements, they don't have foot problems. Actually, they have. We have a little bit a different situation. We don't have that much cracks and toenails like we often find in zoo elephants, but we have actually much worse problems. We have foot pad problems. We have, once in a while, we have also cracked toenails, but not really bad. We have foot pad problems due to lack of occupation, so overgrown foot pad can result in double layers. In between these layers remains dirt and infectious materials, which finally can destruct the foot pad, or also in unhygienic management of the elephants. If they're kept in muddy ground, if they're not properly clean, then this destructs the foot pad, like in these pictures here. This is injury due to a foreign body again. So this is also something that we see quite often, and it took us a while to convince them out that these are really serious things that need to be treated. Here again, you see a foot where, due to unhygienic management, the foot pad was really badly affected, and it is very important for these things to work closely together with the mouths, because, as I said, we are roaming around in several locations. We're never staying none of the locations we're staying a long time. So we need to educate and train the mouths and work with them and cooperate with them together, that they understand that they're willing to continue treatments during the time we are not in the camps, so that can deal. So if it is treated properly and the elephant hygienically managed, then this still can heal. This is just a few agents that we use, antiseptics that we use for this kind of foot treatment. foot disease. Eye disease is pretty much the same. Eye lesions or keratoconjunctivitis, which we find quite often in elephants, which are kept in dusty surrounding and hot surrounding. Relatively easy to treat if it's treated, if it's continuously treated, if you can convince the people that it's important. Otherwise, it can lead to these problems and even to complete blindness. Another, I would say, kind of disorder that we see is stereotype behaviors. Elephants in almost all the places we're working managed in so-called traditional way. That means as long as they're not used for any kind of occupation, they're somehow kept chained singly, either in the forest or if they're still forestless, or in the camps or in some areas. So that has two disadvantages. The elephant cannot freely forage from the area around, and also has not the possibility to socialize with other animals. This often, of course, causes boredom, which at least in all of the camps we can find 1 or 2 or 3 animals that regularly show this kind of stereotype behavior, the so-called weaving. And here also a picture, you can see 3 adult males chained close to each other. They can't reach each other, but they are surely highly under pressure, because usually these males wouldn't stay that close to each other, but would avoid each other. So this is, I regard this actually as a kind of disorder which is triggered by some management insufficiencies in the elephant surroundings. But now probably some people might conclude, so every elephant that shows this behavior proves that in his direct surroundings something is wrong. That is not necessarily the case. Our experience is once an elephant starts to develop this stereotype behavior, even if he is moved to improved surroundings, to improved keeping system, mostly they continue with this kind of behavior. And you can interrupt it, but you almost can't get really eradicated anymore. So we have a lot of elephants which we nowadays see in zoos today, which do some kind of stereotype behavior. And mostly today, if we look at the modern zoo enclosures, they're well designed, they're well equipped. Often the elephants are well occupied by training programs, but once they're left by themselves, even if they're occupied with food, sometimes they show this stereotype behavior, which often is a remainder from some keeping conditions in the past, which were not perfect. So, infectious disease. We don't have a lot of problem with specific infectious disease. We have sometimes tetanus infected elephants, which is quite a big problem. And we have really to be aware closely about the symptoms, because once an animal really shows very clear symptoms of this spasm and rigidity, then it's usually always too late. The first sign that the elephants usually show is the inability to swallow food or water. So they would try to eat, they would try to drink, but it would fall out of their mouth again. The so-called lockjaw is an alarming sign. And if you not at that stage directly start an intensive treatment, it's almost impossible to save these elephants' lives. And most important in the beginning is to administer anti-tetanus serum, which is extremely expensive in Sumatra and not easy to get. Of course, all these other treatments are important. Very important is also, as I said, that the elephants are unable to swallow food or water, is to rehydrate the elephant. So do a fluid therapy, ideally, of course, intravenously, but mostly we are not able to get enough fluids into the elephant intravenously throughout the day, so we also replace fluids directly into the rectum, and we also do kind of stomach tube. Here's a very primitive tool that we have constructed ourselves to force the elephant to open his mouth. This elephant is sedated during the procedure to fit a stomach tube to get water and food directly into the stomach of the elephant. Well, two of the main healthcare two of the main diseases that have been highlighted during the past years in zoos are actually the elephant herpes virus and tuberculosis. So you might ask, what about these two diseases in the population Sumatra? Actually, I must admit we do not know. because we don't have sufficient techniques and laboratories that can investigate for these diseases. But once in a while, we find elephants that have some kind of wart-like lesions, like these two elephants, in here on the trunk and here on the lower jaw, which also have been found in confirmed cases of elephant herpes virus in zoo surroundings. We had also had one case where a young 2-year-old captive-born calf died with symptoms and clinical findings and pathological findings that were quite similar to cases that were confirmed positive in the zoo surrounding. So we actually do not really know, but we hope to work together with some institutions in Indonesia to build some collaborations with some institutions overseas to get techniques over that we hopefully also for the next years probably can test for this kind of diseases. Well, reproduction also is, for very good reason, is a very big issue in captive management, because we want to build self-sustaining captive population on the long term. Well, the most important point for us is we have a low reproduction rate due to limited social interaction. That's a very simple thing. I just mentioned before that most of the elephants are kept most of the time during the day singly, so they just simply do not meet often enough. And that also is a question of education and training of the mahouts, because many of our mahouts do not really have a training or education about elephants. They do not really understand why their elephants do not reproduce. And I continuously get, they ask me, why do our elephants do not have babies? Well, I keep asking them, are you married? Yeah. Do you have children? Yeah. And how did that happen? Someone said, well, somewhat similar with the elephants. So, but you elephants never meet. So that is something that we try to approach. We have a bit more than a year ago, if one in one of the units where they only had 7 elephants, had set up a kind of paddock, a kind of enclosure, where we simply have fenced an area with an electric fence, 60 by 60 meter. I don't know how much is that in feet. Does anybody know?
200 feet.
200. Yeah. A fenced in area where this elephant now, at least during the day, are kept free of chains once they're not used for any kind of occupation, and obviously they enjoy it a lot. So our calves in Sumatra, not surprisingly, are a bit smaller. The birth rate is below the average that we have in the zoos, because in the zoos in the Western world we usually have the subspecies from Thailand and Sri Lanka and India, which are bigger. Sometimes we have very small calves, like in here, which are so small that they wouldn't reach the mother's breast by themselves. So we have to build something to assist them, to help them to feed from the mother's breast. And sometimes we have also young mothers that wouldn't really fully receive their calves in the beginning, and that is something that the mahouts also are not experienced with, and where they need some guidance and assistance how to adapt a young mother to care for its calf. Unfortunately, we had also a few cases where we had infectious disease in the calves, and that was actually after sudden diet change, where mahouts suddenly increased the diet, suddenly increased the energy in the diet. It was well meant, but I always try to mention that that should not be done suddenly, because like in pigs and in cattle, there are a specific disease, Clostridium perfringens type A, that can then can produce toxin inside the intestine and kill the animals. And we had actually 2 cases where then here you see the highly necrotic cecum of this animal. And that was a very bad but good experience for the mouse, because what we had told always to them finally happened. And after they saw this result and we could relate it to the disease, they believed us that what we were telling were really true, and nowadays they are much more careful in suddenly changing the diets of their young elephants. Well, we don't have a lot of surgical problems or issues in these elephants. Once in a while we have a tail to amputate because it's it's a natural behavior of elephants to show dominance to another elephant, or in an elephant that they struggle with to bite on the tails. We also get several elephants from the wild that have short tails, obviously bitten off tails, and that also happens sometimes in captivity, and once that doesn't heal properly and continuously infected, and we amputate a part of the tail. And sometimes we have tumors in elephants, not very often, but once in a while this tumor underneath the tail of this elephant was quite big. That was 3 kilo, I think that's 6.5 or 7 pound. But no, not a big issue. You can remove that, and that heals quite well. So what we try to do in total to approach this health problem, the health management, we try to implement a kind of preventative scheme, which includes a range of activities. Yeah, of course, as I said, we're visiting the camps regularly, so we are coming there on a regular basis, whether we are called or not. We are coming and we're looking after the elephants. We ask all the mahouts to bring the elephants, to check the elephants, do regular health checks on the elephants, and monitor their condition. And also a very normal thing, we would think a normal thing, but never has happened there so far, record all the things that we are doing, record all the treatments that we give, and create a kind of database about every single individual that we are working with. And then, of course, I mentioned parasites are a big issue, implementing a regular anti-parasitic scheme by evaluating the infestation and the species parasites that we find in the elephant, and accordingly treat the elephants every 3 to 4 months. And what we also have done now, we have started to vaccinate our elephants against tetanus to prevent the elephants from the threat of this disease. Well, I mentioned also malnutrition is a big issue in many of the government camps. So we try to provide and educate the mahouts to prepare food supplement rich in energy, especially for sick animals, especially for weak animals, for nursing animals. So of course we have to provide the ingredients, but the mahouts have to know how to prepare it. So again, the cooperation between us and the staff in the camps, the mahouts, is very important to reach some improvements. Also food plantations, and in several of the camps we have realized that the mahouts could do more, and food plantations in a few camps are now implemented, which also in the beginning would not have been possible, but I'm working with the mahouts together for several years now, and with the camp management we try to support them with the equipment, with the seedlings, with fertilizer, with tools, and they do the work, and that has helped in several camps to improve the nutrition of the elephants. Well, a very important part of our work is necessarily to educate the mahouts that we are working with, because as I mentioned, these mahouts never had received any kind of traditional or modern kind of training about whatsoever. So we try to train about the mahouts about several things. As I mentioned, basic elephant behavior is new to them. So we try to play DVDs and videos and about wild elephant behavior, basics about elephant anatomy and physiology, and prevention and treatment of basic medical problems. So how to prepare antiseptics, how to apply antiseptics, how to conduct foot care, how to inject an elephant, because I mentioned sometimes treatments rely on the mahouts. Once we leave the camps and the treatment has to be continued, we need to rely on the mahouts that they continue the treatments. So another problem was when we started to work there, almost none of the elephants were trained for any kind of medical procedures. The elephants are trained for different kind of performances, for different kind of working locks, for forced works, but they're not trained at all for any kind of medical procedures. So the most normal things that we see nowadays in zoo, that almost all the elephants are trained for medical procedures, whether it's foot care, blood samples, mouth inspection, any kind of treatments, trunk washes, that all didn't exist, and that all was completely new to the mahouts. and we partly also had to assist the mahouts to help them, to show them how to train the elephants for that. Because many mahouts were being said, well, it's just not possible, it's not just, it doesn't work. And at the point where you prove them, if you do it, if you work with them together, they start to believe you and they start to continue later on by themselves. So this is an elephant that now very nicely opens his mouth and really very well can inspect it inside the mouth. Besides that, we also try as much as possible to work together with local veterinarians, with paramedics that are sometimes present in the camps, also with staff from the conservation agencies, which is the agency legally in charge for the elephants. Also amongst the staff of the conservation agencies, knowledge about elephants, whether wild or captive, is very, very limited. So that is very important for us to improve the whole situation in there. Another very important tool to educate mahouts, to improve the skills and dedication of all mahouts, is the conduction of annual mahout workshops. The first time a mahout workshop has been conducted in Sumatra was in 2006, which actually was initiated and funded by the International Elephant Foundation. And during this first ever mahout workshop in Sumatra, the mahouts founded themselves a kind of mahout association, the Forum Komunikasi Mahout, Forum Komunikasi Mahout Sumatra, which since now has conducted these mahout workshops annually, and we support technically and financially, and also a very important part of technical and financial support for the conduction of these workshops is coming from the International Elephant Foundation. This year actually, Charlie Gray, who is an elephant trainer from African Lion Safari in Canada, came over to introduce to our Sumatran mahouts how to start the training in a captive-born elephant in an early age, which is very important. In Asian countries, usually, not only in Sumatra, also what I've seen in Thailand, in India, captive-born elephants are not trained from an early age, but it's wait until they're 5, 6, 7, and then they start with very similar techniques like they would use in wild elephants. And techniques to train wild elephants are rather harsh and often cause a lot of unnecessary injuries. And if you start with these little guys at an early age, it's relatively easy, and the elephants easily adapt in an age where the elephants usually naturally would learn everything in their surroundings, so they also learn several other things. And that was very interesting and very new to our mahouts. And many of them said, yeah, well, that's much easier, and we cause a lot less injury like that. And so I hope that from the long run we can change the training structures for baby elephants in Sumatra. Another workshop was when VetTech from Indianapolis came over and helped us to do some training for the mahouts about laboratory techniques, about how to take samples, how to store samples that are taken from elephants for laboratory investigations. That was always also very useful for all the mahouts, again, to know why and how and what for and how to handle these kind of things. And of course, very important for the mahouts is just to have the opportunity to meet each other, to talk to each other. Before that, mahouts from the different camps wouldn't have the chance to meet each other and to communicate, and that now starts to build and improves the overall condition in the camps. Well, of course, it's also important for us not only to talk what they should improve, because it's easy to say what they should improve, but if you are not able to provide the necessary equipment and tools, and then they're just unable, because equipment that they usually have is very poor, so we provide drugs and facilities to store drugs like a refrigerator, racks, and all very basic things like wheelbarrows, shovels. And here we have provided a kind of cart for the elephant for the food and dung management in and around the camp. And another thing is chains. Elephants, the chains are in our management systems still very, very important for the animal welfare. Why is that? Everybody that has been working with elephants already knows if chains are wearing out over a longer period, the edges of the chains can become sharp and can cause injuries to the legs of the elephants. Another point is if the chains are breaking, then the elephants sometimes run amok amongst each other, especially males, try to get in fight with other males and cause injuries. If they do not cause injuries, they go to the next best plantation or garden and feed from crops, and which causes again a lot of trouble with the farmers in the surrounding. And another point is, if a chain gets not replaced, the mouths cut out the weak part and connect again, and so the chain continuously becomes shorter and shorter, and the elephant has lesser movement once he is chained somewhere for foraging. Well, here a very basic treatment and restraint facility that we have constructed, and one can to have a concrete floor, a clean floor, having a roof for the case it rains, still to be able to do proper treatment, and to have some strong locks here where elephants also can be restrained if they are not properly trained for the treatment procedures. And what we try to provide also annually is a mahout uniform, so to provide a kind of basic working gear for our mahouts that we are working together with. So really the main part of our work is with the captive elephants, with the elephants in the government camps and in the conservation units that are run by other NGOs, where the elephants are utilized for conservation activities, but more and more we also get involved in activities in the wild elephant problems. Due to the conflicts, we also regularly find injured elephants in the wild, and we usually get called by either by the conservation department, by local villages, by local other conservation NGOs that don't have veterinarians, that tell us about elephant in the wild that they found injured. Elephant translocations have happened in the past. Fitting GPS collars to monitor the movement of the elephant requires the elephants to be sedated. That, of course, if properly done, requires a veterinarian. Rescue of injured elephants, or conduction of post-mortems and dead wild elephants. So these were two cases. There's one young female that trapped in a wire snare that actually was brought out to get wild boar, but often we find tigers and sometimes elephants that trap in these wire snares. And this was a wild male that obviously villagers in the surrounding had tried to kill using spears. There were several deep wounds on several parts of the bodies. And well, this elephant was reported previously to have been having been involved in crop raiding in the villages. And when we approached this elephant, we got called by a local conservation NGO that informed us about this elephant. And we went there, and the first time when we treated the elephant was still quite weak, so we could approach this elephant as close as 4 or 5 meters and just sedate the elephant by using a blowpipe, and could treat the elephant. Then 5 days later, we trapped the elephant this elephant in the forest. That time he was already very strong and very fit and very active, and we couldn't really get close to the elephant, so we had to use a dart gun to treat the elephant the second time, and we only treated this elephant twice in the wild, and the condition obviously improved, and we got the information from the local conservation NGO in that area that this elephant nowadays is again healthy and active and crop raiding. We have also been involved in elephant translocation. Actually, this was a case where an isolated group of 4 elephants, 2 adult females with their sub-adult daughters, were since several years in an area where they were inside the national park, partly, especially during the night, outside the national park in the rice fields. And these elephants actually had become very, very aggressive because they had the experience, once they chase the people away first and do some bad damage in the surroundings, then the people would be afraid and wouldn't disturb them that much. And actually these elephants also had killed a few people. And a year before the translocation, 1.5 years before the translocation, a program from WWF in this area had fitted a GPS collar on one of these elephants to identify the home range of these elephants. And this really turned out that these elephants were roaming around in an area where, besides these 4 females, there were no other elephants anymore, and they wouldn't move to a different area. So the local government at that time requested this elephant to get captured and brought to a training center for domestication, but all the conservation NGOs involved in that area refused that, and finally we decided to capture the elephants and translocate them to a different, remoter area of the same national park. At that point we wouldn't know whether that would work or not. we just didn't know what would, about a better solution. So finally that was done, and actually it was the first time in Indonesia that capture of elephants was done in a structured way, that the elephants were first tracked, the elephants were driven over a course of 2 weeks from the inside of the area where they're roaming around by using these captive elephants, these kunki elephants, to a location close to the next road where they then were darted, were tranquilizers, and then could be pulled on the trucks, and all the veterinary stuff, drug dosages were really were done by veterinarians, and were brought about 200 kilometers further from this area, and at that area were dragged over 2 days inside the national park, where they were released then. Actually, I said we wouldn't know whether that would work. We also, well, we thought it's most likely the elephant to go back to the area where we got the elephants from. And but because it was a long preparation for that, the conservation department, WWF, WCS had teams to monitor the elephants after release, and actually 4 of these kunkis elephants stayed for 4 months in the area to be able to anticipate any problems. And actually, luckily, these elephants actually socialized with a group of wild elephants, which actually is resident in that area of the park and stayed in that area. So that was luck. We would know that that would happen. We just tried it, and in this case, it was a success. It's always nicer to report about success stories. Sometimes we have elephant calves that get separated from their herds by falling in wells that are remaining from settlements in or around elephant habitats. Here it was inside a national park in an area where no access for vehicles, so we had to use a captive elephant to get the elephant out of there. And dirty duty is sometimes doing postmortems in wild elephants that are found dead in the forests. Well, that is not a very nice work. These elephants probably were dead already for a week or 10 days, something like that. And often in these cases, as I mentioned in the beginning, these elephants get poisoned, and it's not really possible to identify the people that commit such wildlife crime. Even so, we try to identify the reason of death. So we did postmortems on these elephants. We gained samples from the intestine, from the stomach, and actually poison herbicides were detected in the sample that actually proved that these elephants died by poisoning, which actually didn't lead to any further actions or any people were caught or prosecuted or something like that. But at least we were able to prove that these elephants were poisoned, and we could raise that in the local press as an issue, and we could try to make a blow-up out of that, so at least frighten the people in the local surrounding that something is going on, that it's not that easy. And at least that is what we can do if you find elephants like that. Try to identify the cause of death, and if it is an illegal killing, really try to investigate, get the police there, do investigations. We know in the beginning it's very, very unlikely that it will lead to a final result, but at least to do something to show presence in this area. Well, although we don't have really a program yet for others than elephants, we sometimes get involved in other wildlife because the conservation departments and that they don't have veterinarians, and once there are needs for veterinarians for whatsoever, they contact us and we try to help out. This actually was a reintroduction of 2 tigers that were captured by villagers in Aceh, in the province of Aceh, in an area where these tigers had caused conflicts. They had made prey from several livestock and had killed also a few people. So these tigers were tracked and then were brought to the conservation department, and actually the conservation agency intended to hand over these tigers to a zoo somewhere in Indonesia, and due to the complaints from various conservation NGOs, there was then a combined effort to release these tigers. So some other NGOs that are working in there did the surveys of habitats that were considered to be suitable to release the tigers. They set up post-monitoring teams, and we did the veterinary part of the work. And the tigers were also, probably have seen, they have also fitted with GPS collars for post-release monitoring. So that was a kind of a good action. Well, altogether, what is my conclusion for my works in Sumatra as a veterinarian working with elephants and trying to support conservation with my veterinary skills? For the conservation of captive and wild Sumatran elephants, professional healthcare and veterinary expertise is important and can be realized if veterinary support and expertise is provided on ongoing long-term focus. That is very important. If you just go there on a single occasion, do a kind of a single training without any follow-up, without being involved, without continuously working together with the people in there, it doesn't really lead to anything. Well, it's very important, of course, to work very closely together with the people in charge, which is actually the mahouts. The most important personnel for elephants' health is not the veterinarians, actually the mahouts, because they're working on a day-to-day basis with the elephants. We need to improve the knowledge and skills of our staff, and where we need to improve the skills of the mahouts, of the camp managers, of the staff of the conservation departments. And we also need to increase the knowledge of our Indonesian colleagues. Actually, I'm in our program the only foreigner. We are four of us, so the other three are Indonesian veterinarians, but we also involve, as far as we can, people from local veterinarians, people from the faculties, from the veterinary faculties in the areas we are working. And of course, it's very important to have a good cooperation with the local authorities, so with the government agencies and departments are in charge on the provincial and on the national level, to understand and to accept what we are doing, to understand why it is important. And of course, for us, it's very important to continue the work, to continuously secure funding for this kind of work. So in that context, I want to thank the UK-based charity Elephant Family, who has funded us during the past 3 years. And also I want to thank the US Fish and Wildlife Service, which is providing us with funds since the beginning of this year. I want to thank the nature conservation agencies in Sumatra, the mahouts and the camp management for their cooperation. And I want also to thank the International Elephant Foundation, which supports a few programs, elephant conservation programs in Sumatra, and really does a very good job in supporting the conduction of the mahouts workshops during the past years. I want to thank the Woodland Park Zoo and the Elephant Manager Association of America for inviting me here, inviting me to the United States to talk about elephants in Sumatra. And I want to thank Heidi Riddle for her ongoing support in Sumatra and for helping me a lot to arrange all my schedules at my visit to the United States. And I want to thank you all very much for your kind attention.
So, my name is Bruce Bomke. I'm the Deputy Director here, and I want to thank Christopher for giving us a window into a world that most of us haven't seen and probably never will. So we're going to do a few question and answers, and then we'll break and have drinks and hors d'oeuvres, and you can ask them your own questions individually. I just have a couple questions maybe to start us off. One is, given that you have a lot of knowledge about what goes on in Sumatra, at least on the ground, what's your take on how zoos can best be involved in supporting activities like in the elephant camps or in situ conservation?
Well, I think zoos can play quite an important role. I mean, I mentioned already that we get several kinds of support, not only ourselves, or also other programs that are working for elephant conservation in Sumatra, that they're supported by different zoos around the world. But I think besides the individual support for individual programs, one basic conservation work that zoos have to do and are actually doing is just education. Yeah? That's the education opportunity that zoos have are quite impressive. I mean, I just read that you have about 750,000 visitors per year, so that's a lot of people that you can get some message over about general conservation needs, which affects us and affects everything that has to do with conservation. I think that is a very important task that zoos have to fulfill in their daily work. And I think during the past 10, 20 years, I think there has a lot been done in zoos. Well, if you talk about, especially about supporting in situ conservation, of course, if the zoos can promote or can specifically inform about the problems that are existing in the country, or what are the main conservation problems, for example in Indonesia, where we have habitat destruction, where we have oil palm, is a big issue in terms of conservation. And if we are looking around on our daily use products, we almost won't find a single one which has no oil palm. That is, for example, a message that a zoo also can send out to the people. And of course, a zoo, to some extent, probably has the possibility to fundraise for programs, for in situ programs, and attract people in a way no other facility can attract the people. You have elephants in here. Once the people meet with the elephants, they might be open for a conservation message. Once I talk to the people somewhere in the supermarket, once they buy French fries, they probably won't be interested. But once they come to your facilities, they stand in front of the elephants, they see the elephant, and they smell the elephant, they like the elephant, they might be open for a conservation message. And I think that is important. And it always depends on the individual budget that zoos can allocate for in situ conservation programs. Of course, it links perfectly if you have the capacity to support in situ conservation programs in the range countries, for example, of the species that you keep by yourself in your zoo. I think that is a very important link that can be made, and that can be a very important support. And another important support is, I think, my colleague Darren has also worked in Indonesia for a couple of years and has started a veterinary education program, I would say, by bringing Indonesian veterinarians over to your facility and give them training and education about better veterinary techniques to be better able to implement a proper veterinary care for the wildlife in Sumatra later on. So I think there are various kinds of support for conservation programs that zoos can do. And we get supported, we are working together with programs that are supported by the International Elephant Foundation, which is actually zoo funded. Partner programs of us get direct support from zoos, from different zoos around the world. We get supported by an organization whose trustee is the owner of a wildlife and safari park in the UK, and his interest in elephants has been triggered due to the elephants that he keeps in his facility. So I think there's a lot that zoos can do to support this kind of work.